Good evening. My name is Christoph Bartmann. I'm the director of the Goethe-Institut, New York, and I would like to welcome you all to this panel named Ours to Govern and to Own, with panelists from both sides of the Atlantic and from both coasts of the US, and with Trebor Scholz as our host. Why does the Goethe-Institut, the German Cultural Center, delve into questions of the sharing economy and, more precise, into platform cooperativism, a term which Trebor has coined not too long ago? Well, firstly, we are generally interested in current political and social affairs, so with platform cooperativism, we just follow our own thematic preferences. Secondly, I became aware of Trebor's initiatives in this field and also had the chance to participate in the impressive event at the New School in last November. He organized together with Nathan Schneider. Thirdly, the Goethe-Institut in Germany has announced a big symposium for June 2016 in the city of Weimar named Teilen und Tauschen, or in English, the sharing game. So there seems to be a certain momentum, and that's why we decided to do this roundtable and to share some of the theoretical insights and practical experiences in the area of platform cooperativism. I want to say a warm thank you and welcome to Emma Yorra, who hasn't arrived yet, Chelsea Rustrum, Brandon Martin, and Felix Weth for accepting our invitation. And a very special thank to Trebor Scholz, activist and associate professor at the New School, whose new book, Überworked and Underpaid, How Workers Are Disrupting the Digital Economy, will be published in July 2016. Thanks also to Hannah Abdullah for organizing this event. As you can see, we will film and live stream the event in order to reach a broader audience both in the US and Germany, and you can also ask questions and comments via Twitter. That said, I'll give the floor to Trebor and wish you all an exciting evening. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, it's wonderful to see you all. I will just make a few brief comments. Maybe I should first ask, how many of you were actually at the event in November at the New School? So maybe half of you. Okay, so I should start by, actually, I want to start with a poem. Let me see if I can find that. Together we will grow old, we will hold each other close, and we will hold each other closer. We will hold each other as the country changes, and we will hold each other as the world changes. So this as a first piece of this sort of short introductory comment. I want to say that so 8 weeks ago at the New School, we had an event that basically looked at bringing the movement of cooperativism and the digital economy together. Right? So 2 weeks ago I spoke in Paris, and an 85-year-old woman got up and she said she spent her whole life building cooperatives and she would love to bring this to the internet, and how could we do this? And so I think this is sort of some of the spirit of this event that took place at the New School in November. It was called Platform Cooperativism, the Internet, Ownership and Democracy, and so more than 1,200 people participated in that, and it trended nationally on Twitter, so thank you to everybody who was there. We have on the website now videos, some 40 video interviews that you can see, platformcoop.net. And the event was also written up in the Washington Post that declared it a huge success. Articles appeared in BuzzFeed, Le Monde, Rue 89, and Shareable. And the French government issued a report 2 days ago that mentioned platform co-ops of one way to develop the digital economy in France. So Meanwhile, we are also working on a handbook on platform cooperativism in collaboration with OR Books, which will appear also this summer. Follow-up events, this is one of them, already took place in Vancouver, January 12th. Other ones are planned in Austin, Bangkok, Barcelona, Boulder, and the Bay Area. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we are meeting at Civic Hall for a working group. So we would also like to offer you to become part of this community by signing up for our mailing list, which we established, and I can talk to you that afterwards over a glass of wine. So let me just really quickly say a few words about when in 2014 I wrote this short text on platform cooperativism, and it basically described what I saw all around me in the worker initiatives on Mechanical Turk, for example, Amazon Mechanical Turk and the crowdsourcing industry, where people basically said, like, well, why don't we build our own platform? Why does Jeff Bezos have to own this? Why can't we do our own? Why can't we own this economy? And so out of that basically came we saw this in Germany and really all over the world, people starting to build cooperative responses to the extractive sharing economy. So you see, in a way, I think many people will agree that at least the term sharing economy isn't really used very much anymore. Now, much more honestly, people refer to the on-demand economy. And so, just to sort of like really quickly, and a few of you have seen this slide already in November, describe what I'm talking about. Basically, the sharing economy as it is right now with Uber, Upwork, TaskRabbit, Airbnb is basically just a corporate middleman that manages to extract some 20 to 35%, sometimes more, through the mere connection, right, between let's say, a driver and somebody who's looking for a ride. And of course, so this channels, it contributes, right, coming out of this financial crisis of 2008, really sort of benefiting from the precarity of workers, contributes to the channeling of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. So I identified a few various types of platform cooperatives. One is labor brokerages. So we have Felix Weth here today who will talk about Fairmondo. So that's a German example. We will also can also talk about loconomics, which is basically the idea is to build something like TaskRabbit, but for a cooperative, right? And so how can you empower workers with this technology that is usually used to extract value from customers? So another one is also a producer-owned platform cooperative. So this already we see with Stocksy and Members Media, where the idea is basically the people who produce the videos for platforms like YouTube or Vimeo could now also own those platforms on which they are actually distributing those media, right? And so Stocksy is a fantastic example where you have basically a stock photography site where the artists also own the platform, right? Then Janelle Orsi had, a lawyer from San Francisco, had this amazing idea of basically saying, like, what prevents a coalition of cities from building something like Airbnb. So to have basically short-term rentals, but not with the profits not going to a company like Airbnb, but actually going to a coalition of cities, right? So she has various versions of that that she introduces. I also found in various areas of the country, in Denver and other cities, that unions actually tried to help, for example, apps-based drivers, right? So the drivers for Lyft, Uber, and other companies to represent them and basically make their working conditions better. So union-backed platform co-ops. And also there's this, Nathan Schneider brought forward this idea of basically what would happen if an Uber just gets so gigantically big that it would actually be broken up by the government. Couldn't be pieces of this broken up Uber then become cooperative, right? So like a cooperative from within. Then the institution as peer-to-peer protocol. So there's at this event in November, there was a lot of talk about blockchain technologies, facilitating basically transactions between peers without a central company or without a central brokerage firm at all. So that I will not explain right now, but we can talk about later as well. So that there's a proposal for that in Israel, Lazuz, which basically tries to implement that. Okay, so all of that, of course, is not really about the technology, right? So I have to be really clear. I'm not really talking about an app. I'm not really talking about technology per se, but it is really about the change of a mindset, right? A mindset that is now thinks that this kind of extractive economy is working towards one that is really based on mutualism and cooperativism. And so I hope that the examples that we will see tonight will make that clearer. So this is not a technology-focused argument, right? And this ecosystem that I'm showing here basically makes that also very clear. This cannot be about one central app, right? This has to be about an ecosystem, a federated network of cooperatives building something like this. It has to be about, communal banks working together with cooperatives to make this happen. So it's a large sort of ecosystem that has to be cultivated. We have to find completely new ways of raising money, right? It's completely different for cooperatives than it is for traditional startups. And we also have to think about how to educate workers to then really work in those environments and thrive in those environments. Another key question, of course, is how to actually facilitate collective decision-making and democratic governance on a platform like that. So which technology can make that happen, or how can that be facilitated? And of course, one key element as well is that the whole platform has to be free software, because you can't really build this business model on proprietary platforms. So also absolutely essential, I think, is design. So often completely overlooked. I think design has to be one of the key elements that we have to consider to really make this happen. So this is just a short introduction. I have a few examples here that sort of illustrate that further. And as you will see at the entrance, you will find this little pamphlet, right, which I just published, which basically fleshes out these ideas in much more depth. It's published by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, comes out here in English next month, also in German, and then also in Italian and Korean and French and Portuguese. Okay, so I think this is a start to give you some idea, and now I hand it over to Christoph to lead over from here.
Thank you, Trebor. It's good to hear that Emma Yorra has arrived. Meanwhile, but we'll start with Felix Weth from Germany. Just a few words as introduction. And the rule of the game is there are short statements, say 10 minutes, and please don't get any longer. Just allow me a few words about you. Felix is founder and CEO of Fairmondo, a German online marketplace owned by its users. As an anti-corruption activist, he traveled widely in Africa, where he saw how corruption deprives young people of life chances. For Weth, this experience highlighted the structural deficiencies of our economic and political systems. He later developed the idea of Fairmondo, a corruption-resistant, transparent, web-based company that can serve as a model for other businesses. Fairmondo publicizes its banking operations through the Open Bank project. Great that you could come the long way from Germany. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for having me here, for inviting me. I came all the way from Berlin. And I really hope that this is an evening to connect, an evening to exchange, to get new ideas and maybe new friendships, new ways to go further, because I think this is a very big project that Trebor just described, and we're just in the beginning of it. So yeah, looking forward. I'm from Fairmondo. Fairmondo is an online marketplace. We have the ambitious goal to create an alternative to eBay and Amazon. Obviously, that's a long-term goal, but still, a crucial point is that we wanted to create a corruption-resilient business, form of business, model of business. And so it came that Fairmondo became a cooperative, and through the process of creating and founding it, I learned a lot about cooperatives. Not enough yet, but this interesting model of business which exists since over 150 years is, in my view, the future. For internet platforms, but also other types of businesses, but I think in particular in the internet it has a great potential because it naturally fits with the idea of a community, and many internet platforms are based on communities. So, Fairmondo, an online marketplace, you can buy and sell stuff. You could also buy and sell services. You can share things by, well, lending them to one another, by giving them for free. We're providing the functionalities for this, and we do so since about 2.5 years. We created Fairmondo as a cooperative in December 2012, but then it took us a while to create the online marketplace, the very software which we created ourselves as an open source platform tool that hopefully can be picked up and developed on by others who might want to adapt this software to other challenges. Yeah, and so this is what we did. We also try to, and this is part of the model, we want to have it corruption resilient. So one of the crucial issues was how to avoid the mechanisms, the dynamics that come if you get big investors on board. This is a big challenge that the whole startup world is facing all the time. You have a lot of interesting business ideas, startups, also social businesses who have high goals, who have great ideas how to change the world. And then they get an investor, and this investor has a, well, strategy and a policy, and the core strategy of investors and thus startups is the exit strategy. We invest money into something and then sell it at some point. And I think this is one of the dangerous dynamics where we really have to find solutions. The cooperative model is one, but then it depends on how you design the model. So we put a lot of effort into designing our model, which we then quite boldly called Cooperative 2.0. Not saying that we are the only ones who developed a new form of cooperative. There's a variety of impressive cooperative designs out there. Just to kind of, well, challenge the established cooperative movement, saying, okay, maybe we need to rethink some of the established well, ways these businesses go, because cooperatives are businesses themselves. They work in the market, and they can go similar ways than any standard business if you don't design them properly. Yeah, so to say a bit more about our experiences, we said, okay, we don't want to work with big investors at all. We want to give it a try to create a business that is completely owned by its users, by the stakeholders, those who are affected by the business, and where nobody can actually have a big stake. So you can't invest more than 25,000 euro into Fairmondo. And another important point is that we put a fixed salary range into our statute, which basically says nobody can earn more than 3 times the lowest salary in the business. That's quite a, well, how to say, ambitious scale again, given that if you look in Germany at least at the big stock market companies, the average there is between the average wage and the highest wage is 1 to 52. And obviously there are firms where this distance is much higher. Yeah, so for us it's a crucial point to make sure that actually nobody in this business, so our cooperative, makes a huge sum of money of it, even if it grows big, even if it grows so successful that we can say, yeah, we are trying to now taking over market shares from eBay and Amazon. Even at that point, we are thinking, okay, no single individual earns as much to start getting some kind of vested interests and saying, okay, well, I want this business to go my way now. We also try to ensure this by having the principles of transparency incorporated in the statute. We basically need to publish everything that we can publish legally without obviously compromising data protection. That's a very serious thing, which we take very serious. But there's so many things that we can actually publish. For example, we do, as was mentioned, publish our bank accounts live online in the internet. And yeah, by doing so, we want to also try to challenge a little bit the way how business is done, because that's one of the motivations that brought me into doing this. Our economy well, it's infected by intransparency. Businesses have strong incentives to not tell us about what they are actually doing and how they're using their money and so on. And the online companies are unfortunately among those who are very, very far ahead in terms of developing models to hide what they are doing and where their money goes and where they pay taxes or where they don't pay taxes. So all these kind of issues, in my view, need to be addressed, and I think platform cooperativism is a very interesting way to do it. It's because it's not how to say, top down. It's not just a political agenda. It's individual teams, initiatives trying to do things differently, and by that inducing change. So. Yeah, the last 2 minutes I want to spend on, I hope we're going to have some discussions later, but I want to spend on talking about how can we actually connect and make this big and make this moving. In Germany, we now have over 2,000 member investors at Fairmondo. We're trying to bring Fairmondo to other countries. So in UK, there's already a team of people who set up their own cooperative, who will take over the name, the software, be an autonomous cooperative, but very closely cooperate with us so that we can collectively push this project forward. I'm very much hoping that there will be people in the United States who are interested in doing that as well, so that we can step by step create some kind of multinational cooperative, which is not top-down again, not owned by one center, but owned by each of the little local co-ops, having a common goal, having a common software that we develop together, hopefully with other projects too, which we can maybe then integrate into one complex software which serves a lot of needs. There are many models to be designed, many ways to be found to make this happen. But the core point for me is let's cooperate and let's push this forward. There's a big chance, and we're living in this time now where I think we can make a large contribution to changing the way our economy works through this approach. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Felix. I just have a question. Is Emma around. Would you be ready to take over? Just a few words of introduction. Welcome, Emma. Emma is the co-director of the Cooperative Development Program at the Center for Family Life in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, which develops women-led immigrant cooperatives. Emma also collaborates with a worker-owned Rockaways Cooperatives project, rebuilding the peninsula with a cooperative development after Hurricane Sandy. Previously, she spent 4 years in Nicaragua founding and directing an office of the Cooperative Finance Fund, The Working World. Emma is undertaking a master's degree in social economics and cooperative business at Mondragon University in Spain. Thanks so much that you could come, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming out. And yeah, it's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces, and it's really great to see how much traction this idea of platform cooperatives has gotten. I think it took a lot of us by surprise, and it's been really wonderful to see how much this idea is resonating, and great to learn about Fairmondo, and very excited to figure out ways to move forward together. So my name is Emma Yorra. I'm the co-director of the Cooperative Development Program at the Center for Family Life in Sunset Park, which is a low-income immigrant neighborhood in South Brooklyn. It's a social service agency. It's a settlement house that was founded 37 years ago, and we provide wraparound services for community development in our neighborhood. So the idea is that whatever kind of need you might be having, we've got something to try and address that. And if we don't, we want to make a new program to try and do it. So we have everything from an emergency food pantry, benefits, screening and counseling, immigration support, financial counseling, family counseling, lots of counseling. We have an adult employment program, which is what our cooperative development program grew out of, which is a job readiness and placement program, and we have school-based programs in 9 schools across Sunset Park. So we're really intersecting with people in our neighborhood in lots of ways, and providing a holistic model of community development. So the Cooperative Development Program was founded, this is our 10th year, we're coming up on our 10th anniversary, and it really was founded in response to a community need. There were lots of people who we were interacting with saying, we're not getting a very good, treatment in the labor market. We're not able to get jobs that are providing, high enough wages to lift ourselves out of poverty or to really cover the costs of living. And these are people facing lots of barriers to employment. They're immigrants, they have language barriers, they have relatively low formal education levels. And a lot of them are working in the black market, working in kind of the most precarious jobs where you're going to someone's house and providing a cleaning service, but maybe they're not paying you at the end of the service. You're facing wage theft, you're facing every kind of imaginable exploitation and abuse right here in New York City. So we looked around and we saw with wages in California, there were models for working with immigrant populations and forming them into worker cooperatives. So in 2006, we dove in and we formed Si Se Puede, Women's Cleaning Cooperative. Started with 13 members. Today it has 70. In 2 days, they're doing another open house. They keep on growing, which is really great. And the program really has taken off from there. At this point, we're working with 9 worker cooperatives with a total membership of over 180 members in a variety of, mostly service industries. So cleaning, childcare, elder care, pet care, tutoring, kind of you name it, we've got it. And these are people, again, coming from they're mostly Latino women for the most part. So why are we here talking about platforms? What does this have to do with kind of technology? For me, this really came out of like my anger at a Subway ad. I don't know who here lives in New York? Okay. Have people seen the handy ads on the Subway? And like, if you can just imagine, even if you haven't seen them, but if you can imagine, it's an ad that's really, promoting itself for its technological ease of use. Like, I think it's like get a clean apartment with one click, and it's just got this hand that is a yellow gloved hand. It's kind of disembodied, and it's like got a sponge, and you're going to get this clean apartment cleaned by someone you don't see, some magical elf who has a yellow hand and is not really a person, right? It's like, it's all about the technology. It's got none of the human connection. And I would sit there on the subway and look at these ads, and knowing that there's like 7 cleaning co-ops in New York, and knowing that I want their market share to be at least 20% of all residential cleaning in New York, and thinking like, how do we get there? What is the secret that we can get there? So being able to compete technologically is one aspect, right? Like having a convenient booking type of feature where you can just kind of go on and say when you want a cleaning and be able to book it. I think that's what kind of got me interested in this. But the real need here is to scale co-ops, right? Like right now this is something that's benefiting a few thousand people in this country. We want it to benefit hundreds of thousands of people, right? This is something that people have been trying to figure out for a long time. How do we bring this thing, which is good and is exciting, to a scale where it's really affecting people at the kind of level that we want to see? So last year, one of the foundations who supports our work, the Robin Hood Foundation, came to us saying, we're interested in building a platform, and it kind of lined up with what we had been hoping to do. So they enrolled a group of MBA students from Cornell University, and they developed like a prototype, which they called Co-opify, which essentially is kind of like a co-op TaskRabbit or a co-op Handy, and has these different functions of being able to book and do the online payment and both for the client-facing side and for the member-facing side, makes the whole experience more automated and more efficient. Currently, we provide the back office services for the co-ops that we work with as a service that the co-ops pay us for. So this is something that we see could, increase the efficiency and make those services, work better. So this is something that we're just taking on as of January 1st. So we're really just kind of diving into it. We've hired someone to essentially conduct a feasibility study around this for the next 6 months, and it's been really great, even just over the last couple of weeks, to see the potential that this idea could hold. And we've been thinking a lot about, what is the ownership structure for something like this? I think the ownership structure of Loconomics has worked out as a pretty good one of being a multi-stakeholder co-op, but we're looking at a lot of different potential elements of that. Kind of meanwhile, we've also, in the same vein of trying to figure out how do we scale cooperatives, how do we make this a model that can affect more people. We've been looking at developing a replication model, which actually sounds similar to what you've been talking about, so that's exciting. But trying to figure out, are there ways that we can take kind of known best practices and known business models and bring them to communities that are needing these experiences, and make the whole startup process faster, right? We don't want to have to go through 2 years of kind of building it up from the ground up every time. We want to be able to make the process more efficient. And I think something that is exciting is to think about, how do these ideas overlap? How can we use technology? I mean, essentially it comes down to, how can we use technology to get to scale, but without losing the fundamental nature of the cooperative experience. The co-ops that we work with are very participatory, and it's something that we've really come to see time and time again, that the co-ops, the members really value that participation. And so how do we make it meaningful and scalable at the same time? So this is kind of the big things that we're going to be chewing on over the next 6 months and developing. What are the issues with this? I think one thing is that the people who could most be benefited by this work, by joining a cooperative, are the people who are least likely and least comfortable using this kind of technology. So that's a big question. I think that's a big thing that we're going to be trying to be testing with the members over the next few months is, what level of engagement makes sense. Like, does everyone need to have an app? Definitely looking at things that can work over text message has a lot of promise, but the idea is not to kind of make this scalable by making it less accessible or by making it less impactful. Another issue that we're facing is, like, we're a social service agency. We're not trying to become a tech developer necessarily. This is not what we're good at, and this is not necessarily what we're trying to be good at. So I think it is about figuring out how do we learn how to use these tools, but kind of keep our core competencies and what we're good at. Governance and management is a big question, you know, especially as you're trying to build things out on a bigger level. How do you make it so that they remain responsive to the people they should be responsive to once they're at a bigger scale, and how do you make it so that they're managed efficiently? We have a lot of partners and a lot of shareholders in this project. We've been talking to, you know, people from kind of all ends of the political spectrum about this. So just kind of balancing the needs of all of those people is something that's complex. And yeah, lastly, I mean, you know, there's many elements. The co-ops that we work with have been really successful in stabilizing precarious work. And bringing marginalized workers into a much better place in terms of, you know, seeing their income triple, having much more control over their own schedules, and having, you know, really incredible leadership development opportunities. But there's certain things we haven't been able to incorporate yet. Like, we haven't figured out how to provide benefits to the co-ops, and, you know, have people actually having health insurance or, you know, paid vacation days or retirement plans associated with their work. So that's something we would like to, you know, try and work in. So yeah, that's, you know, this is something that we're basically just kind of diving into, and we hope to have a lot more news on in a year or 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Our next speaker is Brendan Martin. Brendan is a founder and director of The Working World, a cooperative financial institution and business incubator based in Argentina, Nicaragua, and the US. Brendan originally moved to Argentina in 2004 to work with a group of Argentines looking to support the recovered factory phenomenon, and out of this was born the Working World Financial Institution and its methods of non-extractive finance and just-in-time evergreen credit. In the US, the Working World has funded 6 cooperatives, including New Era Windows, the manufacturing cooperative that emerged from the infamous Republic Windows and Doors in Chicago. Brendan is a 2009 Ashoka Fellow, a 2-time Ashoka Globalizer, and a nominated Prime Mover. Thanks for coming, Brendan. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Because to be tech forward, I'm going to have my notes on my iPhone, just to prove us cooperativists know what we're doing here. As mentioned, I'm founder and director of The Working World. We're an organization that finances cooperatives. So we know a fair amount about cooperatives. We started in Argentina with a movement of recovered factories back then. Worked in the United States. You give a good introduction of what we've done. I think platform cooperativism is the right thing to be talking about, but I think it's not for the reason we think of. We have this idea like, the world's changing, technology, the sky's gonna fall, everything's new, the future of work, it's all changing. And I think actually that it's good. I can be a futurist, and I think we need to be aware of what's new and not to fight yesterday's or yesteryear's wars. But it's also really good not to think that we're in a special place in history and to realize just how much of what we're doing has been done before. I'd argue that the fight over platforms, whether they are cooperative or owned by just a few, is essentially, you can distill history down to essentially being that fight. Class warfare can really be about who gets to own it, a couple of us or all of us. It is things that have public benefit that are owned by a couple of people, and they get to extract what they will from those who have to use it, or are they shared for the collective benefit? What is new about technology here, it's just a new space to have that battle in. If you look back in history, when the agricultural revolution, quite a technological evolution. You can imagine the old Neolithic farmers sort of tweeting on clay tablets about the new sharing economy they'd found in farming the land and sharing it around with each other. And of course, what happens over time in that history is that a few people end up owning the land. Cities were often built around a granary, which was needed for common storage of your grain. The whole predication of agricultural culture and society was on being able to store and keep grain in a common food supply. Doing that on your own is hard. Doing it together was easier. And of course, what happens over time is that owned commonly, or is the granary something which taxes and benefits a few? And actually, the history of, say, the Near East and Babylonia and such, over the multi-thousand years that they survived, is an up and down and waning back and forth of collectivization or privatization and aristocratization of that society. So for our very short time in this current financialization of history, or even shorter of the current technology platforms, it's very useful to look back to that many thousands of years of history they had of that very same struggle, the platform of land, the platform of granaries, and of who got to own it. Specifically, I bring this up, and I took 2 or 3 minutes of my currency of time up to go back through on that nice little history tour. Finance, money itself, we will say, is the original platform cooperative. Money is something, like we literally go into the ground, we dig out this stuff called gold so that we can dig it up and take it and put it in the ground in Fort Knox again, and we say, look, value's there. And we societally decide that's value so that it can back money, so that everyone in society will accept that. And that's how we can trade, that's how we can leverage. Money, leverage, finance are platforms, and they are very, very crucial public goods that can, as we know that they're platforms in this country when we had to bail out the banks in the largest transfer of wealth in human history to bail out such banks. And yet we also know that they are not owned cooperatively at present. And so when there is a profit, it is privatized. And when there's a loss, it seems to be socialized. So how do we fight that battle in finance? To bring us to platform cooperativism, we fight it with the newest technologies. When they discover how to farm land, we fight the battles fought there. But this is the right fight to have. So when there's a new technology like this, it shakes things up and offers opportunities. We now have a chance to the common platforms of land or of finance, people have accepted that they're owned by few people. It's noticeable because Uber's new and it's come out of nowhere. And we think, wait, why do only a few people own that? It's really, they're not driving the cars. What's going on here? That's very useful. That's why this is a very useful time to think about this, because we realize these things which are commonly benefited are privately owned by a very select few. It's a very good time for societal recognition. It's also a chance where the playing field is maybe more open for us to try to get in there. So again, this is the right fight to be having now. So what are we doing in this platform cooperative? What is our non-history lesson part of this? How are we trying to cooperativize finance? For us, when we talk about finance, first of all, we're talking about old school finance. That's about financing the means of production. Capital, that is, people borrow money for a time they use it because it will create more. That's the kind of finance we're particularly talking about. And in our current world, people aggregate finance together a lot to fund projects, to fund investment projects like I'm describing, productive projects. They work for the investors. Someone will say, hey, investors, come put all your money here, pile it into my hedge fund or my private equity fund or a mutual fund, and I'll find places to invest it in, and I'll get you the best possible returns I can. That's my job. That's like that aggregation that might happen from Uber or something. I'll find the cheapest possible drivers, the highest, I'll surge price at the right times, I'll get the most I can. There aren't that many platforms that aggregate the projects themselves. They're people working on the ground to produce, and they need to borrow money. Think of farmers having to borrow lots of money to grow grain, people starting a business the capital they need to borrow to do that. The idea of a platform cooperative in this space is to aggregate those projects and go to the market for capital. And rather than someone working for the investors who's looking to get the best returns possible, you aggregate the people in the ground actually doing the work to get the best terms possible. You'd say, we'll put it all in the same pot, we'll go out there and look for investment, we'll shop around for the cheapest investment we can get. That's the basic nature of the platform cooperative for finance that we're starting. Now, in technology, what are we doing technologically to do this? We created something called the Madeline system. And this is where I wish I had slideshows, because I'd show you this adorable baby called Madeline, who was born the day that we received a donation large enough for us to create the software project by a donor named Madeline. So it seemed the appropriate thing to do. And in a world of finance where most things are named after or run by men, it seemed like a good idea to try to start on a feminine foot. So Madeline system, or MIS for short, is what we're building. Madeline it aggregates projects together in localities for loan funds, and then aggregates those together across the nation. There's a number of different ways the software platform does this. It allows people in a locality to work with a local loan agent or investment officer to create a productive project, to put all that up into the system, to have it be shared and vetted by people across the nation, to have it be tracked across the nation, of the transactions that go in, the money that comes back, the business plan that's projected, all put up on the system that is shared amongst with all these other local loan funds across the system. So it brings local projects together, and then it brings the localities together to control the Madeline system. So one of the features of the Madeline system is to share the practices of productive investing, or how can we turn cash into productive capital. That's the name of the game we're trying to do. The second feature of it is to aggregate disparate projects to leverage in the financial markets. So that idea of not individual projects trying to raise money from someone who's been aggregating investors, but projects getting together to look for the investment market. And you can get much better terms if you have a much bigger pipeline. If you try to raise $50,000, it'll be a lot harder than if you try to raise 50 million, actually. If you can actually move 50 million, you'll get across thousands of projects, you can get the best terms in the market for it. The next feature of it is accountability for shared capital. The capital comes in through a single pipeline of this essentially producers cooperative. It is shared amongst projects, and the Madeline system allows there to be accountability from one project to the next. If things aren't working, the spigot gets turned off in a place. There are ways to objectively share information on what's happening and to hold each other accountable across these systems. So you can have one aggregated point of entry for capital and then shared accountability for how that resource is shared, that financial commons. The last feature, the basis of this platform, it forms the basis for rich crowdfunding. What do we mean by rich crowdfunding? Well, crowdsourcing has had a nice heyday, but it doesn't look like it's going to compete with the financial markets yet. And when it's a good, to try to bring it farther, to try to actually make it a normal investment that people make, not a kind of fun project, so you actually can have a much larger amount of investment through crowdfunding, you need to have a lot more information on there. The Madeline system, by already giving a way for people to share their projects with each other, they can share them with the public as well. And you'd get a much more transparent, much more data-rich way to share your projects and look for the crowdfunding. It could even allow for local equity investing, and even a form of commercial banking is the long-term project, the long-term outcome of this. So those are the features of the Madeline system. It looks just like any other thing you've seen, with a great design and cool little interface, and you go on there and you put up your loans and you look into the future and you hope it comes true. But those are all the features of it, is to aggregate those people trying to be productive on the ground, people like Goethe wanting to be productive, with someone in California also running a women's cleaning co-op, and they can put their projects up there and discuss them, share them, and look for financing together on them. As some closing points on that, we have actually already started to cooperate with the platform that Center for Family Life has created. So we have had our two techie heads talking R2D2 language to each other to figure out how to make sure that these platforms are the strongest they can be in conjunction. If you're going to put up information about your cooperative to look for financing, why not also have that be the same place you have to put up information about your cooperative where you're looking to get jobs, rather than having to put it in two different places and two different platforms. So how to use robust open source APIs to do this. I could throw their jargon in there so it looks like I know it. I'm not the tech guy. But these guys, that's exactly what they're trying to do. And to bring cooperation amongst platform cooperatives is, I think, part of the Uber goal in there. So to end this, the point, it is an age-old fight, which means we can still learn from the age-old lessons we've had in this fight for who controls our society, who benefits from our society. In the old adage of revolutionaries, and the sort of in the Mediterranean back in early agricultural revolution days, there was cancel the debts and redistribute the land. Was the constant reflecting the common platforms of finance and of land. We might change that now to cancel the debts and redistribute the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. And now, last but not least, Chelsea Rustrum from San Francisco. She is the co-author of It's a Shareable Life, a practical guide to the sharing economy, as well as a consultant, speaker, connector, and practitioner. She both lives and works in the sharing economy with specific interests in how the sharing economy can evolve into being a part of everyday life through housing and peer-to-peer platforms. She's a digital native, a self-proclaimed digi-hippie, correct? And entrepreneur. She also founded several local event series, including the Sharers of San Francisco and Hippie Hour, as well as Startup Abroad, a live work program for international entrepreneurs. Chelsea, thank you.
Hey everyone, apparently I'm the hippie repping from the West Coast. Very, very excited to be here tonight. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I've been working in the sharing economy for the past 4 years now. It all started with being an entrepreneur and co-working, leading into having 40 plus people sleep 20 feet away from my bed in my studio apartment in San Francisco. So through that, I ended up writing a book on the topic, creating community around it, and speaking about it a heck of a lot. And I have to say, in the past year and a half, I've become extremely disillusioned and been thinking, like, what do we do when all of these companies have skyrocketing valuations that are coming off the backs of the people who are actually creating and providing the value? So my question has been, how do we distribute value? How do we distribute value across platforms? And I've been thinking about cooperativism for a long time, like how do we do this in the digital environment? And then these guys came about and said, you know, we're doing this great conference and we're getting people talking about it. And around that same time, I had been considering doing the same thing in San Francisco. So I created a group called the Sharers of SF around the time I started writing the book, and it now has about 1,000 members in it. And this group meets to talk about educational and social, to meet and talk about, it's basically a social and educational series. So we, you know, hang out in bars sometimes and talk about the sharing economy in addition to having educational talks just like this one tonight, where we have discussions on things like what is value and how can we distribute it. So I think actually we're at this really, really beautiful intersection of technology and abundance. The sharing economy has opened up this ideology of we have enough to share. So I think the next step is how do we share value within the platforms? I recently actually wrote a post on Medium titled, I can't remember the name of the post, so I'm a bit nervous. The sharing economy, a social movement dying to become an economic one. And in that post, I talked about how the sharing economy has gone through a few different stages. And the stages that I see that have happened are of human connection, where it started, where it was like, hey, let's have neighbors share stuff with each other, couch surfing, things of that nature, moving into the peer-to-peer networks going crazy, and a lot of venture capital being infused into that. Followed by the gig economy, which is this idea that we can get workers to work for very inexpensive and not have to make them actual employees. Followed by the on-demand, which I see as kind of eating the sharing economy at this point, which is the idea that we should have whatever we want, exactly when we want it, and it should come from an app. So I think a lot of this is actually conflated the sharing economy, and it is kind of experienced a sense of death. But I think the rebirth is actually in platform cooperativism. And another thing I wanted to mention along those lines is that I think that the next stage is actually autonomous technology. And Nathan, actually, who's part of the platform co-op group, mentioned to me that we need to be especially careful when we go into autonomous technology and robotics and drones and other things, that who owns the machines? So I think that's another point of contention in this conversation as we move forward. I would just like to say that I think that sharing is not only smart, but it's also a competitive advantage and a very great business opportunity. And I think that people should consider this model moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. Well, now it's time for discussion, for questions and comments, and I would just invite our speakers on stage first. And, well, there are 3 mics. I hope that's enough. You cooperate. Cooperate. So, please, who wants to start? So I have to start. Trebor, can you tell us how these ideas resonate in policies, in governmental policies, be it on a city level or state level or even beyond, in the US and in other countries? Has this already found some fans in the political field?
Well, I mean, we were really surprised. Like I said in the beginning, a few days ago, a French government agency actually recommended platform cooperative as a way sort of to go for the digital economy in France. And there's also some interest in Australia. There were some recommendations made to the government there, which, yeah, I mean, in a context also of, I think what would be really the way to go is to go to the places where the sharing economy faces the biggest opposition. In Rio, for example, or in Barcelona. In Barcelona, Airbnb is fought by large groups of citizens who just don't want Airbnb in the city. In Rio, Uber was banned. It was made illegal. So I think these would be really fruitful places to go and actually seed that kind of movement.
In terms of policy, we've seen, without obviously the US, the impact of things like Uber and stuff were felt very early, and the Department of Labor held a symposium very recently, and they have an ongoing project on this about the future of work, which is why I referenced that and this feeling that everything is changing from under us so quickly. They have had a deep interest in how this is affecting workers. You've seen that come out, and there was a little tiny good a coded phrase in Obama's State of the Union he gave when he talked about workers having a voice. You can search that. It found its way in there. But they're having an ongoing series right now about how things like Uber and these technologies affect workers. Have they started to say it's platform cooperativism? I haven't heard it yet, but there's definitely deep interest.
I would also say this isn't necessarily specific to platform cooperatives, but at least here in New York, we've seen the city and other policy agencies really starting to take interest in the cooperative model, and I think that's mostly driven out of a growing concern for inequality. And Oxfam just came out with a report showing that 62 billionaires now own the same amount of wealth as half of the world, which is incredible. And it's also incredible that that number 5 years ago was like 300 billionaires, and now it's just 62. So the inequality trend does not appear to be stopping, and cooperatives are a model of ownership that do challenge that.
So I think just this idea of sort of caring for the workers and sort of watching out for the workers. The first FTC workshop on the sharing economy didn't include any mention of workers or any inclusion of workers whatsoever, but then afterwards Obama convened the Workers' Voice Forum at the White House and actually brought all of these people in. So that's definitely true, but I think where this is sort of coming from, in my sort of critical opinion, would be more the idea what Robert Reich called sort of saving capitalism, right? Because actually, like, if people can't feed themselves, they also can't work for $2 an hour. So it's sort of this idea of making this sort of very extractive economy possible at all, right? I mean, if the workers can survive, if they can house and feed themselves, then they also can contribute to these exploitative platforms. So, I mean, I would be cautious. I think the cooperative model is much more genuine, advantage than I'm sure there will be proposals coming from Uber and other companies as well, but I would be, cautious what's coming from them.
Please.
This is in sort of practical terms, I think, a question for Emma and perhaps for Felix.
Felix.
I know this is Felix. I don't know if you're going to have got there yet. And so we mentioned that there were about between 10 and 35% platform overheads, so a percentage that somebody like Airbnb, Uber is taking on a booking. And that, I think that's right, that is range. I think 20 to 30 is pretty normal. So the first point would be that Uber has this stratospheric valuation. It's not profitable. Etsy is post-IPO deeply underwater, and a benefit corporation, I think it's trading at about half of its IPO price. We could go on. So the fact that this value is being extracted is not necessarily translating, at least directly. I mean, you can have a separate discussion about whether these valuations are excessive in capitalist terms. But the point is that you cannot necessarily make a profit just by taking 30% off all of Airbnb's bookings. And the question for Emma and for Felix was, in practical terms, you said that your co-ops are contributing to the cost of essentially running the platform. Do you think that that's sustainably that you can get sort of significantly below that sort of percentage? So what sort of percentage for a platform like Fairmondo, like Coopify, do you see that there is going to be significantly more wealth kept for the co-ops because you're going to be able to pare that down to make what Fred Wilson at Union Square would call a thinner platform?
Do you want to start? I think you have more question.
This is on? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, first of all, I think the core reason why these large-scale platforms are not profitable at the moment is because they invest so much in marketing. It's very easy, and that's one crucial point that often is not so focused maybe in the debates, that obviously creating a platform is a technological challenge, and that costs, and it's a big challenge in the beginning, but really to kick it off, you need to boost it into the market. And it's also part of the value that you're creating is getting traction, getting users as a marketplace, bringing together buyers and sellers at a large scale, and that and becoming a sales support for little sellers. That's the reason why people are using Amazon Marketplace. It's because they can sell their stuff there. They hate Amazon, but but Amazon helps them. And so to get to that scale that you can actually provide that marketplace, you need to invest a lot, and it's crazy which amounts of money you actually need. You have billions invested in certain so-called startup companies who, throughout their time until they get onto the stock market, they invested over €1 billion in one of the startups in Germany. So how to get there as a co-op, where you actually need to provide accountability to your members, at some point provide some kind of at least keeping the value of the money people invest. That's a very big challenge. And I think the one approach that we have to address this is cooperating. It's our way to answer that whole question of how can we achieve scale, how can we reach out to the masses. I think, I mean, we are the masses. We just have to connect. And so this is for me the crucial point. I mean, I've been very interested in what you've been saying about financial, and we should talk about that a little more, I think. But this is my answer on that one. I think let's connect. Yes, you need to become profitable, but you also need to reach that scale.
Yeah, I would say, so I mean, it's interesting, like, you know, we're piloting at this point. We don't have a thing built. We don't know how much it costs exactly. All of that is part of the work that we're doing over the next few months. I will say that we currently do the service of a platform, through a human being, through an office manager, and it costs 5% of the the total cost of the service. And we've basically been able to do that by being extremely lean about it. We have one office manager working with 3 co-ops because when they're in the startup phase, they don't need a full-time person. We have another office manager working with 4 co-ops. Si Se Puede is the only co-op that has a full-time office manager at this point because they now have enough business going through that makes sense. There have been some projections about how much will it cost, and I don't want to necessarily get into that in too much detail. I do think a question is, what does make the most sense? Does it make sense for us to be trying to go toe-to-toe with Handy? Does it make sense for us to be going toe-to-toe with eBay? Or is there kind of a different approach that is actually focusing more on our strengths, focusing more on the reasons that people are coming to cooperatives anyways, and trying to build off of that? And that's the question I hope to have an answer to by the end of June.
Just to try to, I think that question of, why, but if Uber is like this, how's it going to be? I think it's important. I think actually it might be misdirected, that it's not really a feature of the platform business model so much as an internet business model, that you don't have to make a profit to make money. In fact, they don't want that. They want you to grow as fast as possible. So stock price and valuation hasn't been based since the 90s for internet companies on current profits. It's all about absolutely voracious growth. So it's marketing. If you look at the lawyer bill that Uber has, I think it's probably bigger than their tech bill. So I think maybe even a more appropriate question then is, if we're going to put out a platform that has to compete with companies who don't have to make profits and who can get billions of dollars to market, how do we compete with that is a really tough question. Because even if we have a better platform, will people have heard of it? So I think your answer was starting with a cooperation as, it can't just be the same. It's not just Handy too. But
I just want to say, I think that sharing is a competitive advantage, at least it could be seen as that, especially if it's better for the people. And word of mouth is one of the best forms of marketing and advertising. And if something is better for people, they'll tell their friends. If they're going to get paid more and they're going to get more advantage out of, say, a cooperative Uber, they're going to tell all of their driver friends. And that makes it a lot easier to acquire users. So my hope would be that cooperatives actually have a competitive advantage there.
Just a very small comment on that. So Si Se Puede and Beyond Care and all the co-ops we work with mostly get their clients from client referrals and from Yelp. And currently Si Se Puede is higher on Yelp than Handy.
Yeah.
So in the discussions leading up, we had this question of growth and of scale like many times. And developers have said that, for example, they see the advantage of cooperatives that it's not ultimately, it doesn't have to be about scaling up, that it could just be about catering to those members of the cooperative in a particular city, for example, right? So the goal is not to conquer the world necessarily, right, at all. And also to really in the design, so the design element I think that I emphasized before comes in where you could actually communicate how you are different, right? So like how your platform serves a particular worker or has different values that in the interface when people are using your service, you could actually communicate this and make a very clear difference, right? So it's not really just about cloning this sort of idea of the heart of the sharing economy, but it's actually also about sort of creatively changing it and really putting out a value proposition that hasn't been out there before.
Please. Just a moment.
I believe you're right. Years ago, there was this very popular site, and the people took it offline, the people that ran it, and so everyone went over to this other site that was a proprietary thing, and they were treated very horrible, but they all got there at the same time. Another site was built that was responsible, and people would not come over to it at all. People would come and peek at it, but they would go back to the corruptly owned site that was taking all their stuff from them, because that's where the people were. Like speaking of something like Facebook, how would you get people off of Facebook? That's where their people are. That's where their friends are. We found one route into it, and it was creating events and milestones. and making it personal to people. Like, we created a thing called the family tree, where people could see what events and milestones were happening, and that kind of migrated people over to the new platform. But other than that, as you're saying, we're all swimming in this huge sea, like, hey, I'm over here, and it's not connecting very easily. So it has to be made more personal.
Hi, thank you for speaking, first of all. And just a quick question. I guess a lot of you, or a couple of you who are more involved with targeting consumers, spoke about trying to gain market share or competing in the market. How do you sort of envisage in the near term competing in the market, in a market that's like very price driven? How can you sort of like offer your services in a price conscious way without, more, at least in the US, without more overt political action that forces, non-cooperative companies to have to pay their workers a certain level, or, have to have costs that cause their prices to go up? Because I think, the reason that Handy or Uber is so popular is because they don't have to pay their workers very much, and they can drive the prices down as far as possible, and that drives their growth. So how do you envisage competing in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, that's another crucial question. So we already talked about added value, not just competing on price, but also quality and maybe extra service, where we can provide value that maybe other corporations can't provide. But in the end, it comes down, in particular in the internet, in particular, we're doing a marketplace. People, if they shop online, they're looking, first of all, for price. It needs to be quick and easy, but it also needs to be competitive in terms of prices. So I think there need to be, multiple approaches. We need a civil society that raises awareness on the quality of products and the value, the production chain, the supply chain behind it, the whole question of fair trade, of ecologically clean produced products. We need these discussions too, so that people become more aware and start deciding more consciously about what they consume and where they consume. But this is not enough again, I think. I think we need to talk about finance and how we can compete with these kind of boosted corporations that take money from the financial market to provide cheap prices and a lot of benefits for consumers, like Amazon does it, for example. They do offer a very good service. So we need to think about, okay, how can we raise such sums of money? And I think we need to think big at some point to actually oppose that. And the one approach that seems to work for us at a small scale at least is really ownership. Taking people into account and say, okay, which marketplace do you want to use? The one that you own or the one that you don't own? Take them all in and say, okay, it's yours now. It's not just anything. It's your own Uber. If you're the owner of the taxi driver company, which taxi are you going to take? So this notion of ownership is maybe one approach that could work if we manage to communicate it well.
I think that price is one aspect, but access is another. And since marketplaces are two-sided, you've got, for example, with Uber, you have the drivers and then you have the customers. So in San Francisco, I know because I talk to a lot of Lyft drivers and Uber drivers, and a lot of Lyft drivers actually say, I love Lyft because they treat me so well and I feel like I belong to a community, and sometimes people sit in front and the people that ride in Lyft are much nicer. It's just a better experience. So access in the sense that if all the drivers move over to a new platform, people will have more access to those drivers. So I think that's another way to compete.
Let me just say that I think that your question is like absolutely central, right, to this whole discussion. So like this was like two outcomes from this event in November, was basically that these platforms really need to get their value proposition right. So like to really figure out what they are proposing in the market. And second of all, like that, so this goes back to Juliet Shaw, who spoke to that, based on a large study in the sharing economy, where basically the result were for one this, and for the second point was that you have to start with the people that you want to end up with. So if you want to have a certain, she found that basically people were kind of they were often selecting their own ethnicity and class in building those. So when building, basically, she suggested to start with the people you are aiming at from the very beginning. So great question.
I would also just throw in there the concept of efficiency wages and productivity gains. People working in a cooperative have much more of an incentive to do a quality job and to work efficiently. And I think that all the co-ops that I've worked with, you've absolutely seen that, go through, and like Si Se Puede gets a lot of calls from ex-handy clients who have not been very happy with the quality of the service.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of literature that's shown that cooperatives have higher internal efficiencies and not having quite the extraction to investors. You can compete on price and do better. I mean, Si Se Puede, they also get paid much better than the average house cleaner, and yet it's no more expensive to a customer. So there are possibilities there. Of course, when you have Uber not making money, that can be harder to compete with. There are macro forces in the market that are still a challenge, and facing that head on might not be the best move. I mean, like really thinking about your value proposition and not just, God, wouldn't it be great if Uber weren't there? It's still a tough question. What we're doing, if we can say to projects, for example, for us, and people want to make investments, hey, you could be the one to own the pipe that aggregates capital. We get them, and that's the move that we would have to, if we can bring all the projects together in one umbrella and go to the marketplace together. It's like when people unionize. I mean, if they're all together, they can actually then have leverage over the boss, and the boss says, "Oh my, you're all going to quit." A lot easier than one person walks into the office alone and asks for a raise. But it's not. There's a lot of answers there. I mean, if you've got a false market, like where people are selling below what their earnings are, which used to be called dumping, and now it's called innovation. I meant that. If you've got, if in our system where prices are extremely low, like the New Era Windows Cooperative is competing, and most factory workers and window companies in Chicago don't make even minimum wage. Things are not done straightforward legal. They are still making about double what they were making in their own jobs, but there's an upper ceiling which is caused by windows on the market which are cheaper than they're supposed to be. So there's still the old fights of like anti-dumping fights, fighting for raising the floor minimum wage. All those fights are still really crucial. You can't give up on them just because you have a co-op.
1, 2. Who was first? Once again. Okay, and then you are second.
It seems that you're up against not just these big companies like Uber, but also an ideology that a lot of people besides them believe in and that they promote, and it's almost a religion of disruption is freedom and flexibility and all of these things. I wonder if you can just talk about, in addition to attacking those business models, how do you attack that philosophy, which is probably a lot more influential right now than this?
So the post I just wrote actually aims to do some of that, to get that out there to the Silicon Valley and the technologists to say, look, venture capitalists are talking about this, people are investing in it, like there's all kinds of conversation about it, there's conversations about why is Facebook, a platform owned when it's basically extracting the value out of the users creating content themselves. So there's a ton of, I would say, momentum around this. And one of the things that I aim to do in San Francisco is, do events and get the technology people and the hackers themselves excited about platform cooperativism in addition to things like Bitcoin, and show them, this decentralization and these ideas and ideologies are all connected.
I think it's not all that hard to sell, because, we know that 51% of Americans make less than $30,000 a year, right? So more than half of them, can't feed, at one point in their life can't feed their children, can't pay their rent, etc. So there's this it's a real crisis, right? So, and to fight this ideology, you can basically point out, the shortcomings, right? The lies of the sharing economy, the supposed $90,000 a year Uber driver that doesn't exist, who in fact makes between $10 and $12 an hour, as recent Princeton studies have shown, right? Which in cities like Los Angeles would be illegal, right? Which has a minimum wage now. And then this whole struggle, you just sort of show all this sort of drama that ensues out of moving, 53 million people now, Americans, are part of the contingent workforce, right? So there's a shift away from employment, which in itself, whoever loved employment, whoever loved their boss, their, horrible coworkers or whatever, all that, this is not like some paradisical scene. But what you lose with that, of course, is all the sort of benefits, right, that came with that organized labor fought for 150 years, right? Like the weekend, 8-hour workday, right? All of these things, and you lose that overnight, right? Overnight. And there's not enough discussion of that, right? You lose the power of unions, you lose all of that. So, plus, even if Lyft, for example, has good working conditions today, there's absolutely no binding agreement. So this could change in half an hour, right? So they can, and they did do that in Chicago, right? So suddenly 30% less in pay for drivers because we are competing, right? So, and there's squat anybody can do about. So it's there's a real difference, right? So people are really disempowered, and I think this movement towards giving workers rights is really just a recognition that this is heading towards something you might resemble a revolution, right? Or some kind of upheaval, right? Like a drastic upheaval, because people just can't take it. Capitalism isn't working out anymore.
You had a question too.
Just one thing to add. Because to me, this is the most interesting part, from my personal perspective, that's the one I enjoy most. I think creating the story here, and creating a story about a model that can actually work in the future, not the model that we see right now, which just is not supposed or is not constructed to work, which is going to eat itself and which is going to lead to multiple crises. We're creating a model which people can build together, and where people are, as the owners, the ones who drive it. And that's, I think, our big challenge. How do we create projects that people really own, where they feel, okay, this is mine, this is the thing that I can build, this is a baby, this is ours, and this can grow big, and it can grow bigger than the corporations we're seeing right now, if we really work together. So we need to create pilot projects, and Mondragon, where you were studying, for example, it's an amazing example of a if you want, co-op network, co-op corporation that has, I think, up to 70,000 workers within, and a turnover of 5 billion euros. This is just one example, and I think we need to create more of these. They don't need to be only big in figures, they need to be big in people, and I think we're on the way to do this. So I think people will get more and more amazed on the way and feel what kind of freedom and what kind of empowerment this means. So that's why Fairmondo still exists, actually, because we have so many people who come and say, I want to join this, support this, work as a volunteer. That's what brings us forward, even though we have a very tough market to work in. Yeah, thanks.
Please.
Can I just add one short thing, one sentence to that? Is that basically that I think this is the key, is that it's not, I think this rigorous critique has to be there, but to actually to give people something they can embrace, as you say, is absolutely essential. And I think that is also why this was so successful, right? This is why so many people felt drawn to it, because critique, I'm doing these digital labor conferences since 2009, and there has never been so much enthusiasm around them, because it was based on a critique of the digital economy, right? But actually offering examples and, prototypes is what really empowers people, that they feel they can actually do something about this mess.
So thank you very much. It's actually a new topic for me. I don't know that much about the platform cooperativism, but I have read some literature about the old, offline co-ops. And I wanted to ask you a question that's a little bit more organizational. So you keep talking about this as platforms, but I wonder, what is the organizational connection of these platforms to all the organizations that you work for? And the reason I'm asking this is that if I think, for example, Emma, that I am a person looking for work and I am a cleaning lady, right? One way that I am empowered by participating in your platform is that I will be better remunerated, I will be an owner in some sense, although I'm not, that's another question, in what sense am I an owner? But also, apart from that empowerment, is there another side to the empowerment in the sense that, am I participating in any decisions that are being made about the platform itself? And this is all new, but eventually there'll be challenges. These platforms are going to be changing. Who gets to decide how the change happens, how fast, and for whom? And these changes are coming. So if you're not thinking about the platform itself as an organization, then where is the organizational decision making, in a sense?
Yeah, I think that's the key question. And I think that's the question we need to keep asking, is like, who owns this? Who controls it? Who benefits from it? Who gets to decide what ultimately happens with it? And how does that work? I could talk about how the non-tech co-ops, how like the real world co-ops operate and make decisions, where they're coming together in regular meetings and have different committees kind of assigned to different structures. But I think that the question is then, if we're envisioning this as something broader, how do you make ownership and governance meaningful? And I don't know. I think that is a big open question. It's definitely going to have, I imagine it as some sort of cooperative. I imagine it potentially as a multi-stakeholder cooperative where you have a class of ownership shares for people whose work is being, represented on the co-op, and then, potentially a class of ownership shares of people who are in the day-to-day kind of maintenance of the actual tool. But then, is that a system that's governed by a board of directors of 9 people, who are different representatives of the people whose work is being sold on the co-op, or is it something with a more open governance structure, using tools like Lumio, which is something that we've started using with the real world co-ops over this last year. So I think that is a big open question, and how much representation, how much direct participation is appropriate and can actually feasibly work at what scale is an open question for me.
You were the next, okay.
Hello, my name is Jamie. I have 2 sort of separate questions. We started hinting on the capitalism bit, which I think is really important, and was surprised that there was no mention of that in the first talks. But I was wondering whether you all see, obviously cooperatives are inherently anti-capitalist, but do you see your work personally, or just cooperatives in general, as explicitly anti-capitalist? Like your purpose is sort of a revolution type, or is it just, you're trying to figure out the best way to work inside of capitalism? And then the second question is related to trust, actually, in terms of cooperatives. I guess you guys have sort of, there's a founder or your business or the community service or whatever, but I was wondering about your personal experiences with, decision-making models and trust of the people who are becoming the owners of, the business being successful and investing their money and time, et cetera.
Brendan.
We're asking us to out ourselves. I mean, the reason actually we didn't use the word capitalism, I don't mean we, I mean my organization, is people define it differently. Sometimes when people say that, they mean the market system. Sometimes they mean the private ownership of the means of production. Sometimes they mean the financialization of sometimes different things. So there was a little bit maybe of a too blunt a box to use in an audience where we're trying to really break down into what we mean even by a platform and by a co-op. But essentially, yes. I mean, what you would think of as capitalism today, especially if we're successful in making a cooperative out of finance, all those things would be different. People now throw adjectives in front of capitalism. They say, well, it's compassionate capitalism, or it's participatory capitalism, or it's socialist capitalism, or who knows what. You can always try to requalify as you want. Again, that's why the weakness of using a word there. But I think if I understand you correctly, then yeah, the ultimate goal we're trying to do is fight against what is essentially a capitalist intention of making the fewest owners of something which is broadly needed and should be a public good.
So there are people like, Rosa Luxemburg who spoke out critically against cooperatives, or at least questioned the model, because it's still, you're not completely outside of capitalism, right? Like even Mondragon, right, is not outside of capitalism. Inside the cooperative, it can offer fair wages, etc., and fair work conditions, but it is still dependent on exploited labor within the larger system. So, but I have very little patience for those arguments, frankly, because I feel like, here's actually something positive you can contribute to that actually changes the life of a limited number of workers and the people that surround that ecosystem, and so I want to contribute to that instead of rejecting it and say, I'm waiting for the revolution. And anything falling short of a full communism, I will reject. So I mean, here are cooperatives, and there's something you can do. You can, join Fairmondo. You can, build an American Fairmondo, and that's something you can do, like tomorrow.
Maybe two more questions, and then.
She also had a question about trust that I think was interesting. I mean, about the capitalism question, I would just throw the term social and solidarity economics out there. It's something that doesn't really get said much. There's now, I mean, this is very American. There's the new economy movement in the US, because we like things when they're new, even if they're concepts that have been around for a couple hundred years. And, like the actual definition of social and solidarity economics is, there's not a single definition, but I feel like, when I think about, and I wake up in the morning, what am I working towards? Like, I would say it's something in that direction. Just offer that as a term. But I think your question about trust was actually really interesting, and is a big question. And, as we are kind of embarking on this, so much of this is not about technology. So much of this is about relationships and systems of accountability and systems of trust. Last night I sent an email to all the cleaning co-ops in the city, which are like 8, and trying to get them together in February to look at this platform that we're trying to build and think about what the needs for it are. But this is not a group of people this is a group of people that should have been getting together and should be getting together and should be collaborating a lot, but so far they haven't been. So something that we're hoping is, to use this as an initiative to kind of be forming the non-digital relationships on which a system like this could work. But if those don't exist, it's like a channel, and if the channel doesn't exist, the relationship won't flow, whether it's digital or non-digital. So I think that's a critical part of the question, and that's part of the skill set that I think we do bring is like group building and relationship building.
Two more questions, and then there's still a chance to talk later when we have a glass of wine at the bar. Please.
I was recently asked to manage a sustainable development project for an information platform in a developing country. So I have a kind of a nuts and bolts question. It seemed common sense to provide the media, the news, in a citizen journalism platform. As far as trade, some kind of obviously, to me it was obvious, a cooperative, Alibaba kind of thing, only in a cooperative manner. And as far as services, membership services, obviously it's a union. I mean, but what's really the hard part of this thing is not the theory, but launching the satellite and financing this thing so that people in an area that's all spread out and you can't lay wires will be able to have a signal for their telephone, for their mobile units to pick up, and to be able to execute that before either Google or Facebook launches something and then owns everybody's private information. Any thoughts? How do we, can the theories that you all are already familiar with address something like that, and would it take a year to finance it? Just really just general thoughts on how do we launch the satellite?
Literally a satellite. We're going to put something.
Well, how do we finance the launch of the satellite?
How much does that cost?
I don't know what it costs, but let's assume it costs something very high, like $3 million. Let's assume that, which is probably conservative. We could probably get one up cheaper.
I'd definitely like to talk to you. This project sounds very interesting. On the general question, how to launch a satellite, I mean, I think you need to get the right partners on board. With Fairmondo, we've been around also in a few so-called developing countries, talking to people who are thinking of creating their own Fairmondo there. And one partner, which is obvious, is the development industry. It's there. It's right now wasting a lot of taxpayers' money. I mean, not only wasting it, but using it sometimes for not so useful purposes, cooperating a lot with the private sector, which often are multinational corporations. And they are open for partnership. We're talking with people of the German Development Agency, and I'm sure there are other partners you can look into. If you have you need to have obviously a very good plan. In particular, if you want to launch a satellite, I mean, yeah, that's an interesting project, anyways. So because there might be also other technological solutions that might work in that environment, but yeah, hard to say. But that's all I can say on this. That's
a very good answer. Even just a component that we should research further that comes to your mind. In addition, that's a good way to start. But even if anyone has an idea of a component or two, I'll list it here and flesh it out.
But I think there's sometimes, and also at this event in November, sometimes there's sort of a slight slant against whatever theory or history. And I think it's exactly completely wrong, because I think to really study the history of cooperatives and mutualism, let's say in the United States, and see what worked and what doesn't work, this will help people to succeed, So to have a sort of a stand against that, I think doesn't help anyone. And so to really sort of study the history of that and see, for example, Yochai Benkler suggested that maybe research and development, is not something that cooperatives so to go into areas which are really heavy on research and development is maybe not something that a cooperative should do, because it just, might not have the finances to do that. So maybe you should sort of, strategically look at the areas in which you want to work that actually don't demand these kind of investments.
Last question, I'm sorry. Just one more.
Hi, thank you. My question is about nonprofits. A lot of, as far as I understand, part of the project, the cooperativism, is to provide an alternative to the to corporate organizations, especially sort of the standard IPO or privately owned corporation. If we take nonprofits as a sort of historical how do I put this? The historical bad conscience of corporate capitalism, in the sense of being, usually nonprofits were developed either directly or indirectly dependent on the sort of the profits of particular families or particular corporations. Given and it's still something that's very much alive, especially in sort of this New York nonprofit ecology. In that context, say that the platform cooperativism project has some degree of success, what's the place of nonprofits in that world? And I think that some of the things you talked about in terms of development industry, and also some of the work that you've talked about in terms of like what the difference is between the actual that actual structure of the social services center and the accountability towards foundations, towards grant-making organizations, towards, for example, for the Goethe-Institut, towards the government. How did those accountabilities relate to the accountabilities directly towards producers and consumers that cooperatives formalize?
Cooperative nonprofits is sort of one of the ways you do this. Like a Little League team might be nonprofit, but they collect $10 from everybody in the area whose kid does Little League, and they provide that service. Things that can't make a profit but have social benefit, taxes and voluntary contributions not above a certain amount, that becomes a cooperative rather than from just one, former robber baron who seeds a fortune and gets to decide how policy is moved because they had a lot of money to donate. So without a doubt, that should wither away. If we had this all succeeds, we had a huge cooperative economy, you shouldn't have that need. I mean, you should not be driven by a few giant fortunes that would have created that. So the idea of having nonprofits be cooperatives in Italy, and in addition to Mondragon, another place to look for stories is the province of Emilia-Romagna in Italy, where Bologna is based. One of the things that they develop is something called a social cooperative, which essentially is money from the government to form a social service, like taking care of handicapped children. And the cooperative part was, well, we can decide in Rome how everyone's supposed to do it all across the nation and give them prescribe how things are supposed to be done. Or we can allow the parents and the workers inside this clinic to make the decisions on how to use the money. And they found the quality of care went way up, the quality of everything, the community, everything was through the roof with the same amount of money. So that's a form of using a cooperative with socially allocated money. And I think that's the direction to look.
But I think, to be real and to be frank, I mean, one of the weaknesses of the co-op movement in the U.S. is that it is very much so bankrolled by the philanthropic sector. And if you look at, Europe and Mondragon and Italy, you have a social and solidarity economy sector that finances secondary level institutions. That's just not possible, or just at least doesn't exist in the U.S. in the same way. And philanthropy very much plays a big role. I mean, at this point in New York City, it's great that the city has started making these investments, and they are public investments, but fundamentally, unless a nonprofit is intentionally, democratic or cooperative, it does have a, the circle does not close, right? You get money from the foundations, you provide things to your beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries do not then get to decide what happens next, right? It's just a line, it's not a circle, and that's an issue. How do you manage that? How does, I mean, like I said, for this project, we're working with Robin Hood Foundation. It's, I think there's like the kind of up here level conversation around it, and then there's the like on the ground level conversation about it. And the thing that I can say is just, having very clear your mission, having very clear your priorities, making your organization as democratic and transparent as possible, making your organization as non-dependent and as self-sufficient as possible, and then just navigating, that world and seeing if things compromise your values or don't. But I think it's easy to be kind of high-minded about it, and I think it can get quite detailed.
Well,
last word?
Yeah, no, the last. Yeah, so maybe really a last word, because that's, I think, important. This is not about like creating some kind of other ism, right? This is not about like sort of hammering home some kind of concept or term, right? So like you can like discard that term, right? Who cares? But like all the stuff that we talked about today and the spirit of that, this is what really matters, much more than some difficult to pronounce term.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you, the speakers, for your great contributions. Once again. And then thanks to you all for coming, and please don't go out into the cold, rather stay here for a glass of wine. There's the bar. Thanks so much and have a good night.